Hi, this is Jim Cranston from 7 Every Minute and 7everyminute.com, the podcast and website by, for, and about your life reimagined. Thanks for joining me tonight and for more on recreating our own futures. Let's get started. But first, a quick reminder, I'm not a medical professional and I'll be talking about things that I personally find useful and helpful. If you find yourself feeling really upset or depressed, please seek medical professional help or dial 911. Also, dialing 988 is the new number. Of course, the old number also works of 800 273 8255 if you feel you need to talk to somebody. Any of those numbers, keep it in mind, good to know for yourself or for a friend. So, big reminder, of course, if you like what you hear tonight, please leave us a like and tell your friends or drop me a note if you want to hear something different. We'll be continuing on with our goal setting, building upon the first steps we reviewed over the past 2 weeks. If you missed it, check out the videos for January 10th and January 17th for 2023. A quick note, like I said last week, this episode is being pre-recorded instead of being live. I started taking a Spanish course again, which is almost near the time to go live. So I think I'm going to probably have to be pre-recording these for the next few weeks. I think it's an 8-week course, 7 weeks left, and schedule the broadcast to play on the regular time on Tuesday evening. So thank you for your understanding. So last week we covered what happens if we just come up with some dreams and try and plan all the way from start to finish, and how it's pretty easy to get derailed because we kind of lose track of what's going on. And then we covered the alternatives of envisioning what's actually going on. And if we start at the end and work backwards, that it helps our mind a lot figure out really how we want to do this stuff. And so I'm sorry, I'm looking and there's something funny going on here, but I think I just lost my place in my little script. So we then covered alternative ways of envisioning things. And so this method of starting at the end and working our way back, right, as we talked about, has a big advantage because then it gives our brain time to actually get buy-in and understand where we're going. And once it gets comfortable with that, then it's a lot easier to work backwards and solve the problems as they come up. So last week we started talking about all of that and how that gives our brain time to adjust to this new future and think about ways to overcome obstacles as they arise. Then we also started talking about how our mind actually works, and this is starting to get into new material now, and how it all forms all these little automations so that things that happen all the time, like hearing an alarm clock, triggers an automatic reaction, hitting with a pillow, however it is you deal with your alarm. But tonight we're going to go into a little more detail related to how beliefs form and go back to the very beginning, which, as you may recall, was when a stimulus or situation happens. So what's a stimulus? A stimulus is absolutely anything and everything that goes on in your life. It could be the smell of cookies being baked, or hearing that darn alarm clock go off, or seeing something colored blue. It is simply anything around you that you can perceive. It can involve any or all of your senses, and taken by itself, it really doesn't mean anything at all. When you were an infant, a little teeny baby infant, the first time you smelled cookies being baked, you probably thought nothing about it. It was just another new smell in your life. But very quickly, you started to consciously notice that same smell coming around after maybe a few times, maybe it was every weekend. And then most likely you started to form a thought about that smell, kind of like smell, stove, smell, hot, smell, weekend, different schedule. And you had all these different thoughts. And at that point, it was probably pretty neutral. It was just a recurring smell and a recurring thought. And so, that may seem obvious, little person learning about the world. But what comes next is super important and literally will affect us for the rest of our lives. At some lucky point, you smelled that same smell and then you got to taste a cookie. That tasting obviously was another stimulus. Yes, it was. But your thoughts could now associate that smell and that taste. Kind of like, oh, okay. So now I remember something's different going on. It's a weekend. There's that smell. Kitchen's warm because the oven's on. And now I taste this. So now we're kind of, assuming that you like that taste, or even if you didn't, that like or dislike was an emotional response to that stimulus and that thought. So we're now starting to form our actual view of the world. We had the stimulus, then a thought, and now we've added an emotion. So let's assume that we like that taste. We have now started to form a belief based upon that stimulus, that resulting thought, and that emotion that was created at the same time after all those different thoughts. So that belief is, when you think about it, just one of thousands of little automations that we form as people. When you smell a cookie being baked, that automation steps in and automatically decodes that stimulus into a positive emotion based upon our experiences. You don't have to sit and reason it out every time like you did when you were a little tiny baby. Remember that baby, when it first had that thought about that smell, it meant nothing to him or her. It's just a little thought. Okay, there's that thought idea, there's that smell again. But there's another super important point here. Because that happened when we were truly young, it really is deeply embedded in our very being. And we have lots and lots and lots of things like that, whether you like spiders or don't like spiders, whether you are interested in the outdoors or like noisy cities, all those things, when we were little, we formed all these different beliefs about things. If you're in the country and it's very quiet, you hear a siren, it's kind of like, oh, a siren's going off. If you're in the city and you hear a siren, it's just kind of like, oh, it's more noise in the background. So for perspective, a typical person can have over 50,000 thoughts per day. Just think about that. 50,000 times that things come to you that your mind at some level has to deal with. Imagine if we had to sit down and reason out each and every one of those. But beliefs, those little automations, make it possible to take far and away the majority of those, put them on automatic, and that allows us then to concentrate on the unusual things and the important details in a life that's just crammed full of stimulus. Now, however, you're an adult or an older adult, and say you're trying to lose weight, but it just can't seem to resist those darn cookies we were talking about. That is because, in part, you've been running this exact same automation in your brain for the last 20 or 40 or 60 or more years. And that's why willpower really lasts more than a few weeks. You smell a cookie and you associate that with happiness. Now you put yourself into a stressful situation and your brain wants you to be happy. So it searches through all its little internal list of what makes my person happy. And what pops up but cookie. So now do you understand why you think of a cookie or chocolates or exercising or whistling or whatever thing brings you a lot of pleasure every time the situation gets difficult? It's because you've been training yourself with this association, well, for a lifetime. And once you get enough of these automations all built up and influencing your daily actions, on automatic, you're starting to define your identity, which is really nothing more than how you respond to all the stimuli around you in life. But that's really for another much larger discussion. The biggest point for this evening is starting to recognize that some of the things, those little automations, are really running most of your life. And it's probably a lot more than you realize. And it's not necessarily bad. The cookie was a pretty simple and straightforward example. But, just making something up. What about the time your grandmother said money's always evil and will make you even a good person turn bad? Perhaps you were maybe 5 or 8 years old, but grandma always seemed to be right about people. And she was really nice. So even though she perhaps only said it a few times, she was always so serious and it always seemed so true. So it became one of those many little automations, beliefs that you have. Now, decades later, you're trying to start your own business or ask for a raise, and you're thinking about how much money to ask for. And that same little automation goes off to keep you safe, says, but don't try and be too rich because that's what makes a good person turn bad. Hopefully now you see why some of these little automations, which are there to keep us safe and happy, sometimes in the context of adulthood, they may no longer serve us very well. And that's the big takeaway for today. We all have hundreds, even thousands of beliefs. And while they all started out as apparently useful, sometimes, either because we misunderstood them at the time or because our lives have evolved, they may not serve us well anymore. So your homework this week is to try and identify even one or two things that you do, good or bad, it doesn't matter which, but take some belief you have, say just pick one, and try and think back about how it first came into your consciousness and the circumstances around it. For me, in baking, for example, I do a lot of baking. I used to do a lot more. but I still do a lot of baking. I can remember going to my grandmother's house when I was perhaps 5, maybe even younger, and watching her take a fresh homemade coffee cake out of the oven. And she wasn't bashful about adding crumbs to the top. A lot of sugar, fresh out of the oven, cinnamon coffee cake. I can still envision that completely and totally. And it's over 6 decades later. Remember that emotion and belief. Clearly, they are so deeply hardwired into my brain. So now, think about all those other things in your brain, especially things that aren't serving you well now. Again, this is why just trying to power through it with willpower rarely works. And we'll talk a lot more about this and how we actually root them out and what we do about them, because a lot of them are so automated, and that's the point of their little exercise, our little homework. They're so automated, we don't even realize they're there. And then we start thinking about it, it's kind of like, oh, that's why every time I go to the store, I thought, boy, a coffee cake would taste good. It's because you've been thinking that way for 60 years in my case. And so that's why I say in the homework, be careful what you pick out, because some things, tend to lead to funny places. So, quick aside, in the course of doing this, if you find yourself getting into a difficult mental place, then just stop. Sometimes we start to think about things, we get ourselves way off track and into funny corners. That happens, you may want to talk to a professional or just pick a very different topic and try and work on that instead. This should be a fun and rewarding exercise and hopefully make you smile or maybe chuckle a little bit about something. It's not supposed to be scary or difficult. So that's it for the evening. Pick a thought, run it down, and try and figure out where it came from, and hopefully it leads to someplace entertaining. Again, there's a whole lot more to cover. We'll pick it up again next week. But for this evening, where did it go? There it is. Remember, please, UKR7, and that's the site where I have a list of links, places you can donate to support the people of Ukraine. And up there's also the link to the World Central Kitchen. Again, they're a neat organization. If you want to do things that are strictly humanitarian, they are totally humanitarian. They're providing meals for the people in need. Remember, one of the best ways to care for yourself is to care for others. So if you can and you're able, please check out ukr7.com. And as always, thank you for stopping by. If you found something interesting or useful, please pass it along and please hit that like button. If not, please drop me a comment as to what you'd like to hear. Have a great week and a wonderful new year. Remember to live the life that you dreamed of, because that's the path to true contentment. Love and encouragement to everyone, and see you next week on 7 Every Minute and 7everyminute.com. Thank you.